Good evening, fellow heretics, and welcome to tonight's show. I'm your host, Captain Dadpool.
And I'm Natty Nat.
And you are watching Nerds and Heresy.
Hold on to your butts.
All right, joining us tonight is Dr. James Tabor. He's earned his MA and Ph.D. from the University of Chicago in 1981. He worked as a professional, as a professor for the professor and professional.
He was a
professional professor.
He was a professional
as opposed to a non-professional.
As opposed to an amateur like the other ones.
Remember, the word means to profess.
That's true.
So you profess things. Yeah.
Anyway, he was a professor for the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina, where he taught Christian origins and ancient Judaism for 33 years. He previously taught at the University of Notre Dame, and the College of William and Mary. He's also done field work in archaeology and has worked at a number of sites in Israel and Jordan, including Qumran, the site of the Dead Sea Scrolls. He was involved in the 1993 Waco tragedy, drawing upon his expertise in understanding ancient biblical apocalyptic ideas, and testified before Congress in the Waco Hearings in 1995. Dr. Tabor has also authored over 50 published articles, as well as 9 academic books, to which I've posted a link in the description below, so everybody can check them out. Or you can just visit his website, which I'm going to pull up real quick. I did not have that prepared. There it is. Oops. Yeah, there's the website linked below. Go check it out. There's awesome stuff on there.
It's got a really hard URL. It's jamestabor.com.
Yeah, it's
very difficult.
Yeah. So if you can't figure out how to...
Yeah,
Oops.
it's J... Yeah.
So if you can't figure out how to click the link, just type James Tabor.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
All right. So I guess
that website, by the way, just to plug it a little bit, it's got about 800 entries on it, and most of them are pretty substantive, meaning, some blogs are just like, oh, here's what I did this morning, and I saw this book, and I did this and that. It's not that kind of blog. It's kind of subject heavy. So if you print out some of them, what you can do, typically they're going to be like 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 single space pages. So I intend it to be more, now that I'm doing YouTube as well, which I'd done a teeny bit before retiring, but now I'm doing a lot. Often I'll cover something, but then if you go to the blog or the website, jamestabor.com, you'll get like a full exposition. So almost any topic I mention, like Waco, for example, if you typed in Waco, there's a real good search engine on it. You'll suddenly see just dozens and dozens of posts on Waco.
Oh, brilliant.
That's
awesome.
The way it works. Somebody
awesome.
printed it out once, and I think it was like 3,000 pages. And I thought, what kind of a printer? Do you have like a free printer, or how did you do that? Anyway.
I don't even know 3,000 words.
Yeah, so. Okay.
You've read the Bible, right? I think there's 3,000 words in there.
That's true.
But have you read the entire Bible? Because, lots of times people cheat with certain books. Like
He has.
Haggai,
And-
Zephaniah.
Mm-hmm. All of it.
Mhm.
And I've read
And
some
he's
of
done
the
it in
New
Greek.
Testament. I've read some of the New Testament in
Tobacco,
Greek.
the book called Habakkuk, that's like Tobacco Cook or Habakkuk or something.
Habakkuk, yeah.
You got it.
Habakkuk.
No, my students always, they have such trouble with that. Dr.
they don't
Tabor,
know.
what's that Habakkuk? And it's so important in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh, it
The
is.
book of Habakkuk.
Right, yeah,
You wanted
that's
to
one
talk
of
about
Kip's favorites.
apocalypticism and its failure and so forth. That's the golden egg text for the delayed fulfillment of prophecy. Remember, if it tarries, wait for it, it will surely come. There you go.
Well, so we like to say, if you dig, they will come, because everyone always wants to know why you have a shovel and you're on the side of a road.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, some sketchy business there.
It is. Well, shall we jump into to the hot topic and then move along from there?
Yeah. By the way, if anybody has any questions, feel free to super chat them, and we'll get to them either sometime during the stream or we'll tackle them towards the end. Until then, yeah, let's get started. I think Nat seems to know more about the Waco Massacre than I do.
I have a decent understanding of it, but what I want to know first is, you met David Koresh. When was the first time you met him? Like,
Well,
when was that first?
I didn't actually meet
interview?
him.
Oh, okay.
None of us were able to meet him. I didn't know. I heard about the BATF raid on what they called the compound.
Yeah.
The group there, now we call them Branch Davidians. They call themselves Bible students. They called it the Mount Carmel Bible Study Center.
Mount Carmel Bible School.
Not so right away. It got, it's the compound.
Yeah. Well, no, of course you're going to label it as a negative connotation immediately. It was an us and them thing right away.
Right. So that was February 28th. It was on a Sunday, and my wife called me down from. I was up in my study Sunday morning, not going to church, I guess, or whatever I was doing.
That's where you messed up.
She said, "Come." It was around noon, and she said, James, come down quick. There's this crazy guy on TV, and he's talking about all that stuff that you like, which meant like Book of Revelation, the Seven Seals, prophecy. Probably, I have a lot of specialties, but the thing I've probably dealt with the most is apocalyptic thinking in the late Second Temple Jewish period, which would be particularly, say, 135 Bar Kokhba BCE, all the way down to the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70, sort of an apocalyptic heyday. If the end was ever going to come, it should have come then, really, because, everything kind of was in place.
Yeah, it was all the rage back then.
Exactly. Really, so that's what she meant by the stuff you work on. She's an English major, and she did say once, James, if you had spent, she said, the Bible better than anyone I've ever known or met or heard of. What if you had learned Shakespeare to that degree? Can you imagine how much richer your life would be? I don't know how, I know you had Bart on recently, but Bart has said several times, I don't know if his wife's an English major or not. She might be into literature. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, she was.
But he's made comments along the same line that I answered her. I said, well, Lori, actually, I wish I knew Shakespeare the way I knew. Oh, I would love it if I could just drop quotes right and left from obscure plays, and I would just be the talk of the town in every party. But I don't know. I feel the same way Bart does when you ask him, well, why are you so... This is the underbelly of, we could say, the West, but because it's penetrated worldwide with Abrahamic religions, you're essentially sort of down underneath the underbelly of the whole structure of our whole culture and its values. And so I still have to plead innocent or guilty, take your pick, terms of I'm glad I chose the Bible. I really am.
I get asked a lot because I make educational content primarily on TikTok, and I often get Christians like, why do you still study the Bible if you're not a Christian anymore? Because I used to be a very devout Christian, and I turned atheist after I got my degree in theology. And I was like, because it's so much more fascinating to me now than it used to be. Like, I used to know everything. Like, boy, you couldn't teach me anything I knew. And then I started reading it as a skeptic and being like, I used to believe in the Trinity. Now that's not in there. Why did I believe that was in there? And now I'm like, okay, the Exodus. Oh, apparently that never happened. Really? That's interesting. So like, I need to learn about the other gods in the Old Testament and how they came to attribute to the what eventually became Yahweh. And it's like, this is so much more exciting than it used to be.
I was going to say, the only reason why I have any interest in biblical study is truly because so many people value it as a building block of their own belief system, of their own culture. And it's the anthropological view of how that block gets shoved into places where it really doesn't belong.
It doesn't need to be religion either,
right.
Identified as religion. I teach a course on Paul. I'm retired now, but the subtitle is How Paul Has Influenced All We Think About Everything.
Yeah.
And
I love it.
one person in our department said, don't you want to just rephrase it a little bit less comprehensively? Nope. And I said,
nope.
I want it to have that hook for students to take the course, but then I want to show them the ways they've been influenced by Paul, even if they never read a line of Paul or even thought about Paul, because Paul is the most influential person in world history, in my opinion. And I know it should go to Jesus, but
I would add an asterisk in that and say that he was the most influential person of that time period, simply because he was the loudest, I think. And that tends to be a big thing with historic figures, is whoever makes the biggest splash, that's what, those ripples are what goes through time.
You think of, the past 1,500 years until the Enlightenment, but even today, really, the last 500 years, that kind of theology that he proposes so determine Western history and all the assumptions, and of course it's Hellenistic thought in general, and from Plato to Paul is an easy move actually in many ways, but and all of those extravagant statements, Jonathan Smith, my teacher, used to say, it's okay to exaggerate, but exaggerate in the direction of the truth. And so that would be a hook or an exaggeration, maybe, and I could back off a little and say, well, okay, maybe he's not the most influential person. Maybe it was, some modern scientist like Darwin or something. Certainly Darwin has influence, but Darwin doesn't come in as much if we're debating a lot of ethical and social issues, where Paul is always in the background, even defining marriage and all the you say, well, that's in Genesis. Yeah, it's in Genesis, but, everything is finally passed through Paul, because that's the Old Testament. Talking about Christian culture. I mean, Judaism has its influence, but it's on a different level than But we didn't come to talk about, who's the most influential person in Western history. So.
Oh, sure we did.
Okay.
Of course. Why not?
So I'm going to say Paul, and and we have his letters, so at least 7 of them.
At least
that's a big thing too, is like Jesus never spoke for himself. People always spoke for him, and Paul the most. Like Paul's the one filtering Jesus' theology, and like, here's what you should believe, here's what he meant, blah 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 blah. And he's speaking to an audience that didn't know any better, because it's it's the Gentiles, and he's saying the gospel is now available to the Gentiles, and that's not a teaching that Jesus has said, at least from what we can tell in the Gospels. So like Paul is influencing this whole new audience.
It's called Christianity. Yeah. So he creates it. I mean, a lot of scholars would agree with that. It's a blatant way to say it. He's the founder of Christianity. And if Jesus remains an apocalyptic Jew in his own time, he's not founding anything new. He's kind of like a Micah or a Jeremiah or a Hosea, with a certain sort of call to return to that perspective from what we can tell. But Paul, do you remember, Rick, the way you said you read Jesus and Paul? And I always start lectures on Paul or that book, even in my classes, with the statement that I've spent the last however many decades. As I get older, I keep adding decades, but let's say the last 4 decades, trying to clarify the empty space between 2 statements: born of a virgin, crucified, dead, buried, and raised the 3rd day. I just quoted the Apostles' Creed, that's summarizing one God the Father, one Lord Jesus Christ, born of a virgin, crucified, dead, buried, raised, coming again. there's a gap there. Born of a virgin,
It's a big gap
crucified.
there.
It's called like your life and what you were and what you stood for. And Paul basically, I mean, I think the Apostles' Creed, the oldest creed in Christendom, outside of the New Testament, skips his life. And that's what you confess, what Bultmann called the thatness of the gospel. It's like, it's a series of doctrinal affirmations. Like, do you believe born of a virgin? Check that. Was he raised? Was he crucified, dead, and buried the third day? Yeah. Is he coming again to judge the living and the dead? Yes. Okay. Let's throw in the Holy Spirit and let's throw in one God the Father. You got all that? You're a Christian. Whereas I think Jesus would say, well, maybe we should talk about how you're living a little bit. You know, there could be a little content there besides me just ticking off the doctrines. But people died because they wouldn't say this stuff. You mentioned the Trinity. I mean, think of Sicinius, you know, and that are, you know, you die because you said Jesus wasn't Yahweh or God or eternal with the Father. I mean, man, that's pretty heavy.
Yes, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm jumping back a little bit.
Waco.
So you found out about what was happening with Waco on the
same day it happened.
The same day it happened.
What I noticed that day, David Koresh, the leader of the David, let's call him the Branch Davidian group, about 120 followers living in Waco. I wrote down some stats. Let's see, 41 men, 46 women, and 43 children. So 40, 130 are there. There are others scattered around the world, but this is kind of the headquarters, the spiritual headquarters of the group, because you're studying with the teacher, David.
Right. Yeah.
And he did claim to be a Christ figure, but he knew enough Hebrew. He'd gone to Israel and so forth, and he'd educated himself enough to know that Christ means anointed one. So that's one of the things that the ATF and the FBI immediately misunderstood, that this two-bit guy with the gun claims to be Jesus. And
he's like, I never claimed to be Jesus. He claims to be anointed.
Anointed. He did claim to be the final messenger, which is kind of common with apocalypticism. The guy, it's not always a guy, but I'm going to say the guy because 99% of the time it's been guys. They claim to be not the only one, but the final one who's going to bring it all to the end. He certainly claimed that. And he found himself, this is the other dynamic of messianism, when you can find yourself mentioned in the scriptures. You know, you read it, and I don't mean a crazy person wandering Jerusalem babbling on the street. I mean somebody that's studying academically in their own academic world, meaning looking up Greek words and Hebrew words and studying in depth and going, oh my God, I think that's me. Like the final angel's voice in the book of Revelation, the seventh angel sounds.
Even Paul did that.
He thought, I'm that.
There's the connection there.
Yeah. So I didn't know any of that. But on that very day, February 20th, Sunday,
I don't know. Hold on.
She went dark, but
something's happening.
Well, anyway,
you're back. Well, you're not back, but the light has come back.
My light was flickering on and off. I don't know what's happening.
He gave this what the FBI. Well, the FBI took over the next day, Monday. So it's BATF. And on that day, let's see, I wrote this down. 4 BATF agents were killed, 20 wounded. 6 of the Branch Davidians were killed, 4 wounded. So it was bad all around.
Yeah.
There's so much to say about it, but I just want to focus more on your question about what sort of contact I had with Koresh for a minute. So he gave they called it a rambling, incoherent speech about who he is and what he was all doing.
Trying to write his final idea.
He's wounded, and he's wounded in the side, and it's very painful. and there's no anesthesia. I don't know that
But he spent like, what was it, 48 hours trying to write these final thoughts of what he explained were the
50,
7 seals.
Yeah, that's 50 days later. So wait. So anyway,
okay, I'm jumping ahead. Sorry.
Phil Arnold and I, who's Rice University Ph.D. that I had worked with on other projects, he called me. He's in Texas. He's in Houston. He said, I'm going up to Waco. They're saying the guy's incoherent. I'm sending you a copy of his speech. And we used faxes then, I think we had maybe primitive email, but, and he said, take a look at it. It's very understandable if you know these texts, because this group is the kind of group where every verse in the Bible is marked, literally this is their world. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you can kind of enter that world, it's not incoherent at all. It was also transcribed incorrectly. The Waco Herald Tribune published it. And for example, my favorite example, do you know who the liar of the tribe of Judas is in the Bible? The liar of the tribe of Judas?
The liar.
Well, that would be incoherent. Guess what he said? The lion of the tribe of Judah.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
There were dozens of those kinds of misunderstandings.
They did a great job on Netflix explaining that particular misunderstanding, and that they did great because at that point, because they were like, they had transcribed it wrong, and the Branch Davidians were freaking out because what he said wasn't what was reiterated, and there was a whole.
You can get that on Amazon or Paramount. It streams. It used to be on Netflix. I don't know if it still is, but it's worth watching. Yeah. I was an advisor to the filmmakers. They did a great job. And anyway, so Arnold and I realized right away, well, wait, what they need is somebody to translate what they're calling Bible babble, mumbo jumbo, the thing that everybody always mentions. I noted in the first chapter of my book, the 7 seals they thought were animals, like seals, like seals, flap, flap, flap. No.
It's the 7
that was
steps,
explained early on.
The 7 events leading up.
Sealed. Yeah. So it went on for 51 days. This is my book on Waco. It's still in print. University of California Press. It's still quite readable, even though it's a university press. So don't shy away from it if you're interested in Waco. But notice the title, Why Waco? It's more about cults and the battle for religious freedom in America. Why do we even call a group a cult? And what groups do we call cults? And who is it that's going to define what is a cult and what is not a cult? Some people say, oh, well, it's a high demand religion with the charismatic leader. And they demand everything of their followers. I said, oh, that's what I studied. Jesus of Nazareth, you mean? Oh, no, he wasn't a cult leader. He was a true Christ. Oh, so David Koresh was the cult leader, but he, so we tried to contextualize that. So we didn't actually, Arnold was there. There means Waco, Texas, at the Hilton Hotel, and all the press conferences every day for 51 days. But it captured the country. And if you lived through it, you would remember it. Your older listeners, if you have at least one, will remember this. You mentioned your mother, right? Maybe was riveted to that. It was on the news every night. Remember back then, news was more ABC, CBS, and NBC. Nightly news at 6 to 6:30.
Yeah, it wasn't 24 hours.
Every evening they would
everyone looks at that time.
Yeah, they would begin with, it is day 48 in Waco, Texas. Let's bring you up to date. And sometimes there would be headliner news that would trump that, to use a term that's now ruined, but because Trump has trumped everything. But it would trump that, and it would come first. But always Waco, Waco, Waco. Time, Newsweek, U.S. News World Report were the 3 magazines, cover stories on Waco. Probably each of them did half a dozen over the 51 days as the weeks went by. So the whole country was focused on it. Like we kind of are on a shooting or other kind of tragedy, except this went on and on for 51 days. So it wasn't like one thing one day, oh, it's horrible. Let's talk and interview people endlessly. Remember the Ukrainian war? Remember the first week of that? That's all you could hear, and even the first month. And now it's like, oh, well, it's been 6 months, and lots of the news shows don't even mention it anymore. But Waco was on all the time. But where we came in was, Phil was there. I didn't go there. This was all remote. Phil and I were talking to some of the Branch Davidians. We're mainly trying to tutor ourselves quickly in understanding. And we finally were able to get in touch with Dick DeGuerin, who was going in to talk to David. He's a lawyer, a Texas lawyer, and was trying to negotiate a kind of settlement that would include legal protections for people and so forth. Because if federal agents have been killed, I mean, there's real questions about all kinds of things, who shot first and what kind of weapons and so forth. And I don't want to whitewash the group and say anything about them that makes them so wonderful or whatever. But the whole thing was a mistake from start to finish. And I think that's generally been agreed. That
it all started as
they
thought it was a they didn't even think it was a religious thing. They thought it was a militia concept. Like they were prepping for.
No, they knew it was religious, but it's a religious. What's better than a religious cult that also has guns?
Right. Yeah.
And the idea
it was a juicy tag. Yeah. Stockpiling. Yeah. Absolutely.
If somebody pointed out, by Texas standards, if you take just the adults, it would be 90 adult men and women. They were undergunned because the average Texan has 3 to 5 weapons, and theirs ended up being, I think, 2 to 3. So actually, they had less than any other group of average Texans that would be together like that.
Right, but it was all in one location.
That's true.
That's the issue.
But so were the people. That's where they lived.
Right. That's they weren't.
But the FBI and the ATF are correct in saying that the reason they had those weapons is they were expecting an apocalypse, a confrontation with the government, and if it happened, they wanted to be prepared. So in that sense, there was that malicious side to things, but it just shouldn't have been handled that way. I could give you many examples. My favorite one is the gun dealer and the local sheriff. Jack Harwell is the local sheriff.
Yes.
He's gone now, dead, unfortunately, but he knew them very well. And he would have said to them, if he knew there was going to be a raid, why don't a couple of you guys go out and we'll sit with David on the front porch and drink a sweet tea and talk about it? Because I go out there all the time. And other people had gone, like people from Children and Family Services had gone, because there had been reports of so-called child abuse and so forth. But Henry McNannon was the gun dealer in Waco that sold many of the weapons. So before they even had the raid, they went to him. This is the BATF, and said, could you give us records on everything David's bought? He says, well, let me go to the back. He calls Koresh on the phone. He says, David, there's BATF agents here asking what you bought. That I got to give them. He said, it's no problem. You can give them anything you want. But he said, tell them to come on out here. He said, put them on the phone right now. So he walks out with the phone. He goes, I got Koresh on the phone. He said, you can have any records I have, but he wants to talk to you guys. He's inviting you out to look at them right now. Everything he has. They go,
I'm on the edge of my seat.
No. Because the raid was already planned. I mean, that came out in the congressional hearings. It shouldn't have been done. And then for 51 days, what do you do with an apocalyptic group? I'll tell you what you do. If there's a possible confrontation, make it normal and boring. Just every day is the same. Nothing's happening. But deprive them of water, deprive them of food, play loud music, rabbits getting slaughtered, screaming and yelling, lights
doing
inside.
Psychological warfare. Yeah, the psychological warfare bullshit.
Then they decide,
you're going to make them believe they're...
I don't think these people are our friends. I
Right.
think maybe they are the ones that are going to attack us someday, and they begin to fulfill their very prophetic expectations of what.
That's what I was wondering. Do you think at some point David realized and switched his motivation from, hey, we can work this out, to this will be the end, and I can use this as my motivation and my preachings to correlate the end with my teachings? Like at some point,
only maybe the last day when the fire started, because they thought the end was coming. But you know what their plan was? They planned to all move to Israel, and they thought the final battle that they would be involved in would be when, if you know the book of Daniel, the king of the north comes down and attacks and surrounds Jerusalem. Zechariah 14, I'll gather all nations. They plan to be fighting with the IDF side by side, the Israelis, against an invasion. And they were quite sure, because the prophecy doesn't say Waco, Texas, it says Jerusalem. That was their, if you had asked them before this happened,
that was their temporary place.
That was their gathering place and spiritual headquarters. David would teach the Bible and so forth. So, but when David did offer to write this manuscript, which I published after the fire, it survived on a disc, and you can get that on my website. And you can find it everywhere. And it's called The Decoded Message of the Seven Seals of the Book of Revelation. David did believe that he was being given a chance. And what Phil and I argued with him, or presented to him, we had to do it on tape because we couldn't go in. But DeGuerin, the lawyer, took it in and played it for him. And we became the people he trusted, Phil Arnold and James Tabor. And so on Wednesday before the fire, I'll read you what he sent out. I think I've got it right here. Let's see. This is his letter. It's actually dated April 14th. The fire was on the 19th. So there it is. There's the letter signed by David.
Oh.
This is not the original. It's a copy. But he says, I'm presently being permitted to document in structured form the decoded message of the seven seals. Upon the completion of this task, I will be freed of my waiting period, and I hope to finish this as soon as possible and stand before man to answer any and all questions. And then he says, this will not be sold. What we had said to him was, look, the Apostle Paul wrote some of his letters in prison, even if our whole interest was getting people out safely.
Sure.
They could hash out the legalities of who shot first, or who's guilty, who's innocent, or what he believed. So what we said was, nobody knows your message. According to the media, you're a cult leader, a crazed Bible babble fanatic, that's leading a suicidal cult or something like that. If you actually have a message, put it in a summary form, because you got the attention of the whole world. And that really appealed to him. He realized that was true. What we said was, on April 28th, maybe 1,000 people on earth had heard of you. And guess how many now are watching your every move? What is your message? If you claim to have this decoded message of the book of Revelation, what is it? And what he says is, I will demand that the first copy be given to you. That's Dick DeGuerin. The letter's Dear Dick, his lawyer. Many scholars and religious leaders will wish to have copies. I will keep a copy with me. And as soon as I can see that people like Jim Tabor and Phil Arnold have their copy, I will come out and you can do your thing with this beast, this capital B. So that was on the 14th. We were overjoyed. We thought it's solved. DeGuerin had a legal document sent in. He signed it. They were coming out. I've talked to several survivors. There were 9 people that survived the fire, David Thibodeau being the main one I've dealt with. And David said, we were so happy on that Wednesday. we were practically having parties, but we didn't have anything to drink or celebrate with because it was over. We're all coming out. It's going to end, and David's going to get his message out. So we told Koresh that we would present his manuscript to the next meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature. Like we would print it up and distribute it and do a special session. And I figured he'd be in jail because religious scholars, American Academy of Religion, Society of Biblical Literature, they want to study the phenomena of, religious movements and apocalyptic groups and so forth. So we felt sure that they would go for this. We had proposed a special session on the recent Branch Davidian crisis that would be over, thank God. And what was it that these people believed, and where did they belong in the spectrum of, Christian prophecy belief and so forth?
Sure.
That's what we hoped. And that was Wednesday. And then Janet Reno, I was able to speak with her later. And she did finally give the word. And she was not told about this letter. She asked the weekend, the top FBI guys met her, Jeff Jamar mainly, who was in charge of everything in DC, and others. And she kept saying, well, is there any argument for waiting? It had been 50 days or 49 days when they met. They said, no, there's no, they're not going to come out. He's lied many times, which is actually untrue. He did say it would come out March 2nd if they would play his sermon on a national station, which they didn't do. They played it on a local Dallas station. Nobody ever heard it. And once he heard that, he said, well, you didn't do what you said. But Reno asked, she was in charge. She'd just become Attorney General. This is Bill Clinton as president.
Right.
And she said, but, if we wait, is there any argument? If she had known this existed, and she told me this, I talked to her face to face. She came to UNC Charlotte, gave an address, and she asked to see me because my book had come out and I'd been in the congressional hearings. And she said, James, I grieve every day. I think of those children, I think those people, how horrible it ended. Whoever's fault it was, forget that, it's over. Shouldn't have ended that way. She said, if I had known that he was proposing this, if I had been told, of course I would have waited, a week or two?
Oh, man.
And so it's very tragic, and I've never blamed her for that reason. Jeff Jamar, he does not believe David was working on the manuscript, even though it survived on a disc. And he has said to us, several of us, how do we know that was written during the time of the siege? And the way we know it is now we have this that is an outline of the first seal that came out with the letter, and it lists all the scriptures that need to be typed in. Because he was trying to work so fast that he wouldn't quote the scripture. He would just say, Psalm 90, 12 through 17. You got that down? He said, once we get it all written and show them we have it. And even on the day of the siege, Steve, his right-hand man, was on the phone with, it was with Byron Sage, who was in charge of operations. And he said, we've got the first seal written. We can send it out right now and show you he's working on it. And they said, we've been up all night typing because you had said you didn't think he was working on it. If you want to know the whole story, I'll tell you the fastest way, other than read my book, of course, is listen to the last recorded words of David Koresh on my YouTube channel, James Tabor Videos, and just type in Koresh or Branch Davidians. I think Koresh brings it up the best. Yeah. I think it's like about a 15-minute tape of him talking to FBI agents when he's writing this, and he's so excited, he jokes with them. It's jovial. Remember, these are the negotiators. Remember, Natty, you watched the film, I think, and remember how well Gary Neusner was
documentaries,
played.
and I've watched the series and everything.
And you saw
I was so fascinated
how the negotiators were making real progress, and David was beginning to trust them, especially Dick on the 16th and Henry on the 18th. Look at these.
But the negotiators and the BATF were not on the same terms.
It wasn't the BATF. It was the tactical people versus the negotiators.
Right. Sorry.
So
they had two different. Yeah. There was
he's talking to Henry on the 16th. That's 2 days after the letter, and Henry's saying, "How's it going, David?" It is so friendly. You know, Dick was off duty the day before, and David's on the phone with him, and he says, "Oh man, I'm glad you're back. I missed you." He says, "Did you eat a pizza for me, Dick?" He said, "I ate 2 of them." He said, "All I can think about is getting out of here and getting a pizza." You know, they're talking on that level. And he said, and a hot shower would not be bad either. And then he talks to Henry on the 18th. So this is 2 days later. This is a day before the fire. And he's telling Henry, he's so excited and he's glad it's working out and it's all solved. That's the best evidence, because that is live. That is with the negotiators. You can actually hear it. And if you just listen.
Oh, no.
Oh.
Ah! Maybe he'll come back.
Cliffhanger.
If we just listen. Says the seventh seal. Yeah. I was drawn in.
I know. I'm on the edge of my seat here.
I know.
I went away.
Okay, good.
Was it me that went away?
If he had just listened.
Yeah, it was you.
I don't know what happened. It just went blank. Let me check I'm using my iPhone, but the battery's fine. I guess anyway.
So if he had just listened.
Yeah, if you listen to that tape, you'll get an idea of how jovial it was at the end and how excited David was to come out. He goes, "I'm so tired of eating these MREs, and I want these people out, and these precious people, you know, we don't want any harm to come." And he says, "I feel terrible about your agents who lost their lives." He said, "I feel horrible about that. And the people that we lost, people that we love." He said, you know, it's just so reconciling. And yet can you imagine if Attorney General Reno had heard that tape? They could have played her that tape. And then finally, I want to just say, and then we should go on to other things, or we just do Waco for 2 hours. But I want to say what Bill Clinton said in the Rose Garden the day of the fire, because this is the lesson. I think he's genuinely grieved by what happened, and you know, anybody that watched it with those 43 children dying. Yeah. He said, "Well, maybe that it'll be a lesson for those who are tempted to join cults." And I just thought, "Oh no, I need to talk to the president." Later, I did.
That was the wrong thing to say.
I did get my book to him later, and I got my book to Chuck Schumer and other people during the hearings, because the whole point is, as a free country with First Amendment rights, we cannot define what are the approved and disapproved religions. And as far as high demand and telling people all kinds of things that give you nightmares and scare the hell out of you, how about your local primitive Baptist preacher on a Sunday morning, maybe covering hell? You know, I'd call that high demand. Yeah. So the point is, I think we all agree, not all, but I wish we all agreed, there can't be compulsion. Like, you can't tie somebody up and put them in a closet like Patty Hearst and brainwash them and make them, you know, come out like the Manchurian Candidate or something. But in terms of persuasion, I had students all my career that would join some group, and parents would write me and say, couldn't you talk to them and give them maybe a more objective, critical view of Scripture? I would say, well, not if they don't come and ask me. I'm not going to hunt down students on campus and say, oh, you believe the Bible's inspired. And that could lead you to some really, like there was one group that was telling people the end is near, drop out of college and don't get married, and quoting Paul, 1 Corinthians 7 about the time is very short. I'd call that high demand. You're changing your whole career in life. And Rick, you came, I assume, from a pretty devout background.
Yeah, it was a charismatic Pentecostal.
Probably high demand, wouldn't you say?
And not nearly the worst either.
Yeah.
So my church was pretty mild compared to.
And I don't, President Clinton's alive, and I respect him for what he, I think, intended to say. But the idea of using the cult word, it's in the academic study of religion, we don't use that word. So this subtitle is supposed to be purposely seductive. Cults and the battle for religious freedom in America. You pick it up and you think, oh, Waco, oh yeah, that cult. It's about cults like Waco. What's it about is if you call a group a cult, you're really questioning what does it mean to have religious freedom. And this can include people who worship Satan, right? People who believe
everybody was a part of a cult.
People who talk to demons, people who believe in flying saucers, or say they got probed
belief as a whole.
Yeah, any belief. And high demand. Most small religious groups are very high demand. Like you need to go to church Sunday and Sunday afternoon and Sunday night.
Well, the peer pressure is so high between it's very.
The Mormons are not high demand. Well, then people would say, yeah, but they're a cult. Well, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So I define a cult as a religion with no political or societal acceptance. That's what a cult is. It tends to be a new religion, one you've not heard of. But has the Catholic Church not been high demand even in the 50s?
Oh, see, it's one or the other. It's either every religion is a cult, or it's just the one.
It's just not a helpful word. Now, what is helpful?
Not very helpful. It is something that in anthropology we do not use either, unless the only time we will refer to something as a cult is if they themselves refer to themselves as a cult. If it is a closed circle society, a negative, it is a very
lots of groups believe that their particular brand of, say, Christianity is the one true version. That's very, very common. And particularly,
why would you follow the second one?
Exactly.
If you thought that your religion was close but is not quite the right one,
you'd go to the
right one. Why would you follow that and not go to the right one?
No, it doesn't mean we can't describe a high demand group with the charismatic leader who claims to have the final word and thinks the end is near, but you say those things. Those are not labels, those are descriptions.
Right.
And then you can talk about it. Would you like to sell all you have and give to this person?
And there's Jehovah's Witnesses. No, now we've brought up them. No, actually, I have two more questions correlating, and then we can bounce into other subjects. One is there were some people that did get out of the left prior to the fire, during negotiations and prior to negotiations, but I wanted to know if you have had any contact with any Branch Davidians since then.
All of them, yeah.
You've talked to all of them?
Just about, yeah.
Wow, that is amazing.
Well,
how are they nowadays? What are they functioning? Are they trying to regroup? What is?
No, remember it's 30 years, so even the children have had children, and But
no, I'm so curious.
Most April 19th, that's the anniversary of the fire. There are gatherings in Waco. Those who can come. there are still some believers in David and all that he stood for, and they still think, just as Jesus followers once thought, or still think, but I mean, in the ancient world, that he will return again and he will be vindicated and the judgment is near. 35 people exited during the siege. 9 survived the fire. And I haven't talked to all 35 because a lot of those were kids and I don't know the kids. But the main group we call the survivors that have been interested in this and so forth. And David Thibodeau being one of the main ones, and Clive Doyle, who recently passed away of cancer, was a real spokesman. You've seen him a lot, I think, in shows and interviews.
Thibodeau really is pretty quiet nowadays, isn't he? He's I haven't heard much.
I think after the
first 5 years.
Yeah, after the movie, he was the chief advisor for the film, the Paramount.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say the movie, the 6-part series called Waco. So that was his heavy influence. But
they used his book, and then they used the guy
Gary Newsom,
the Negotiators book, right? So those were the two that they based the stories off of, and then they pulled in advisors like yourself to correlate stories and
it's very well presented. And the most frightening thing, other than the fire, which is really bad, is February 28th. That you think you're looking at the opening scenes of Saving Private Ryan with the D-Day landing, because if you watch the film, it's terrifying. This is a frame wooden building, and you've got all this fire from the helicopters and from the front. And yet, I always make the point, and I know it infuriates people for me to make this point, but just go online and find the footage of the shootout, and you will see the ATF agents behind the Branch Davidian vehicles out front, and they're shooting like this, bang, 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 and you hear, and you look up and no windows are broken, like nobody's shooting out the windows. And they said that we took so much fire, it was like being in Vietnam. And you're thinking, but no windshields of the cars you're behind are broken. So are they like such bad shots that they always hit the dirt, but no dirt's getting kicked up? I'm not saying they didn't fire at all. We know 1 or 2 that did fire, but it's presented usually as this standoff shootout, gunfight at the OK Corral kind of thing. And it really wasn't that way. And that's why David was so upset when they removed the cars. Those cars stayed there the whole time. And the front door shows who shot first and is it incoming or outgoing. It's a steel door, okay? And Dick DeGuerin saw that door. Guess what? That door is gone. It's disappeared. Also, tapes taken of the footage of the shooting is news footage that some news people were able to get from a bad angle. But they have expert filming of the whole thing from the front. Yeah. That film, they said, well, the cameras
disappeared too.
They're not working.
Right.
And the doors disappeared. It's a steel door.
The cameras that got all the non-broken things got.
And this is not conspiratorial as much as just, come on. Steel doors survive fires, and the door is gone. We don't know what happened to the door.
Nope, covering tracks.
So
you'll be able to look at it and see that there's no bullet holes in it.
I don't think I want to say this, I don't think Byron Sage or Jeff Jamar, certainly not Gary, even Bob Ricks, who was pretty negative on David. I don't think any of them wanted them killed or rejoiced and, burning. I mean, they've been demonized by a lot of right-wing militant types that go like, oh, the FBI, they just wanted to kill those kids and burn them up. And There was a little macho stuff going on that you do find, if you know the Randy Weaver case.
Well, there's always that.
There was an underlying need to have a presentation for, like, I think they were like changing out budgets and something, and
that was part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there was a
they
need to be like, look, they're
it,
useful. They stopped this thing that happened, or that was going to happen, or could have happened, and instead it turned into this huge mess. Like, that initial raid was supposed to be like a quick in and out, and like a bunch of people get arrested and be like, look, we did something.
I think Byron, the two main people, Jeff Jamar and Byron Sage, I think, and I believe I've spoken to Jeff at the hearings. We spoke briefly in the hall. They are genuinely heartbroken and grieved at what happened, and
well, it's not what they planned.
It's ruined their lives in some way. I mean, they feel horrible about that it ended that way, but they were convinced that if they put the CS gas in, they would all run out and it could be over and not a shot would be fired and it would be over. So unfortunately, it didn't end that way.
Right.
So we gone 55 minutes minus I went away for 30 seconds.
So
did you want to take a break for a while?
No.
If you would like to. No? Okay.
I don't need a break. I just.
So then I have a different question. Still regarding the quote unquote cult. Again, not my favorite term, but are there any current or active minor religions that are being watched or that you are observing and seeing as apocalyptic currently? I mean, you did kind of mention it backstage before the show. How there's a
maybe transition.
There's a very particular non-Jewish.
No, the things that are happening now are more geopolitical. It would be people interpreting the Middle East, and for example, evangelical Christians that are dispensationalists and into Bible prophecy, who think Jews are lost without Christ, but they think the only way they're going to be saved is for the temple to get rebuilt, which is going to cause quite a bit of problems, and a war in the Middle East, and then the Antichrist to come, and then Jesus' return and all that. That's nothing direct, like a small group in Waco that has these beliefs. It's kind of a more general thing. But remember, my expertise is really in the ancient world. The only reason I stepped out of that period is because David was living his life as if he was almost in the first century. In other words, I would interpret the book of Revelation during the reigns of Nero and Domitian and put it into its historical context. He's taking all of that and putting it into our world, which many interpreters do today. So there's a sense in which it's my field, but not my field. So even though I got into it and I keep up with certain prophecy belief and so forth, it's more of a side interest in that what I've really trained to do and what my doctorate's in is New Testament and early Christianity. So that's more,
Well, I appreciate you letting us dive into the Waco disaster. I appreciate that. I know it's like it is fascinating and terrible in all the ways. And
this is on my website. 2 pages. I made sure I got it on 10 neglected aspects of the 1993 Waco tragedy.
Oh, brilliant.
And if you go to jamestabor.com, you can put in Waco and find it. The book, if you want to go full into it, and then that tape. So any of your listeners that are, well, I don't know if he said this and Tabor didn't cover this and what about that?
We can
believe me,
dive
I've
into
covered it all, but we were just getting an overview and I was hitting some things off the top of my head.
So I guess I kind of want to bounce this into your interest in archaeology because you mentioned it briefly and your origins of it, and I'm intrigued by it. If you want to give a little snippet of that.
Sure.
because that
Well,
also piqued my interest.
My my I majored in Greek undergrad and history and Bible, but I was really interested in Christianity. I took Hebrew, but I was more interested in Greek. I'm more interested in Hebrew now, but that evolves. And then my master's was early Christianity, and then my doctorate was New Testament and early Christianity and classic, but set broadly in the Hellenistic world. So I wasn't in the divinity school. I was in the humanities school, and I studied with Jonathan Smith, who's probably the greatest historian of religions, more an anthropologist that you will know as much as who studied religion. Like he wrote his dissertation on Fraser, so the Golden Bell.
It was very entertaining.
So so that's really my field, and that's what I prepared. But this is text. I read texts. I read texts. So from 1981 or 2, when I got my degree, all the way through grad school in the 70s, 80s, all the way up to 1990, I'm doing texts, decades of texts, like getting the doctorate and then 10 years of teaching. And in 1990, I had made 2 trips to Israel, once as a kid and once later on a tour. So I started going and participating in archaeology in 1990 at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found.
Ooh.
And since then, I've made 68 trips, and I've been involved in about 8 or 10 excavations, and I've been co-director of 5 of them. And they happen to include all kinds of areas that relate to what I study textually, that is Jesus and early Christianity. So I would say now that without that material evidence, that contextual geography and history and what's under the ground and what's been found, particularly in the last 20 years, it's revolutionized everything we know, like what was Nazareth really and what was Sepphoris. Many Bible students have never even heard of Sepphoris because it's not mentioned in the New Testament. It happens to be the urban capital of the Galilee. So it would be like, I live in Charlotte. There's a little town south of here called Matthews. I bet you've never heard of.
I live near you.
Oh, you're in Asheville, yeah. All we knew was Matthews, and maybe a president came from there. And 200 years from now, we write his biography, and somebody says,
he's from Charlotte.
I looked in the index, and you didn't mention Charlotte, the largest urban center in all of North Carolina. And you go,
right,
Charlotte? What? Oh, God, did I miss? What's Charlotte? This is what people are doing. They go, what's Sepphoris? It's the urban center of the Galilee where Herod Antipas had his palace.
Literally etched in stone, mapped out, made marked this is
so
Sepphoris.
The first place I dug after Qumran was Sepphoris.
That's cool.
That's really cool.
And so I try to, as much as possible, the last 15 years I've dug in Jerusalem on Mount Zion, because that was the center of the Jesus movement after the death of Jesus, where James took over and Mary, his mother, lived on for several decades. Paul would come and meet with James and Peter, and they're meeting on Mount Zion from what we can tell. So I think that material evidence is essential, and it's so good for my students. I've taken probably 700 students over the years altogether.
Wow.
In groups of 20.
That's so many more than I thought.
And they usually get to dig for 2 or 3 weeks and get their hands dirty and learn the methods of archaeology.
There is something about being in the dirt that just somehow you retain more information when you learn than.
And what we're learning now about Galilean villages, and you ask things like where are the stone vessels found, and what towns have pig bones and which don't, and all kinds of kind of social indicators, and what sort of imported pottery is found. You can't start talking about, say, the village of Cana in the Galilee, which is misidentified in the Middle Ages, but the real Cana, where Jesus turned the water to wine.
Right.
Well, that's been excavated now, and we know something about it. And there are other little towns in the Galilee. Shechem is really important, where James Strange is digging now. I really recommend, where is it? Let's see, we have to put in a plug for.
We have to put in a plug.
Please do.
For Biblical Archaeology Review. You have to subscribe to this if you're going to keep up with this.
Yeah.
Look at, I just got this yesterday. Here's an issue. I mean, an article by Joan Taylor. Look at this. Mary Magdalene, mistaken identity.
Hey.
Oh, what?
We think now we might have the wrong place. So all of this stuff about, Mary Magdalene and Jesus used to hold hands sitting in the front bench of the synagogue. And it's been excavated. And anyway, just keeping up. This is Hebrew Bible, New Testament, everything. It's edited by Glenn Corbett. It's just absolutely a wonderful. It's been going like over 40 years. If you join, I have all my students join the library. It's so ridiculously cheap. I don't even know, but like $40 for a year or something. And you get the magazine, but you get the archive online. And talk about a rich, these are academics from all the areas writing articles.
Well, not only that, but because there is a private vested interest in religion, they get funded more than most academic and institutional digs.
Yeah.
So biblical archaeology is one of the most active ranges of archaeology that you can come across, because you have all of this private money coming in.
Right.
Instead of, I mean, it's kind of.
And
cool.
yet, so-called biblical archaeologists would all say they're not biblical archaeologists. They're just
most
regular
are just archaeologists. They just happen to be there.
Well, no,
which is really interesting.
They have degrees. You don't study archaeology and religious studies. It's in anthropology. They're anthropologists with degrees in archaeology.
Right.
And
because America's backwards.
Now, when it first started, it was that way. But today, the people working at these sites are using the exact same methods that you would use at your sites. And if the Bible, among other texts, can shed some light on certain claims of the period, then you consider that as one of your sources. But this idea of opening the Bible and going, I'll go dig here because, I want to find, nobody does that anymore.
Well, I mean, even nowadays, so one of the biggest pain in the asses of archaeology is when you go to revisit a site and you find really shitty notes. And that happens so much more often than people think. And of course, they didn't have GPS at that point in a lot of the ones that you want to go back to. And you end up having to hunt for a site. And it's a pain. So
lots of it was poorly done, particularly in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s.
Well, that was the treasure digging stage where they're like, we found a thing, and just pull it out of the ground, show it, and they're like, no.
Or give away things. They would say, here, I found this pot. Would you like to take this home and put it over your fireplace? We got a lot of those. So.
Yeah, that was the thing.
No, it's.
I do have a question.
This magazine is.
Go ahead.
You're going to find. The editor has his Ph.D. from the Oriel Institute at Chicago and so forth. It's very, very high level, but it's for the common reader, and it builds on the interest people have in the Bible. So there's all kinds of stuff on, like, is there really evidence for the Exodus and things like that. It's all handled at a very high level. So.
Very cool.
I recommend it to people.
I do not know why I'm not subscribed to that.
You better. I do have a question because a friend of mine, I can say that now. I'm so happy I can say that now. We had him on, about this time last year. And he is Dr. Kip Davis. I don't know if you know who he is. Yeah, I had a feeling you've kind of known.
Mainly through Derek Lambert's stuff. I've seen him on there, so.
Yeah.
Okay, that's neat.
I don't think we haven't met each other, but He works a lot on Dead Sea Scrolls, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yes, he actually was the one that identified the forgeries of Dead Sea Scrolls within
the Bible Museum. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it would be really interesting if we could pull you and him on a show at some point. Maybe get you guys together to talk about the values of artifacts. Sure. That his artifacts are still valuable even though they are forgeries, and the whole concept behind the philosophy of like having these items and just like being able to obtain them, and how like even though they're, in fact, I think some of the forgeries, he said, because they were so well written or because they were so well done and so hard to identify, those ones are worth more than others, and now there's like a value and actual price put onto these artifacts, which is insane in my mind, because like artifacts of any age and any time is they're priceless in my mind. But
yeah, I'm not a philologist, so my idea, my expertise in the scrolls would have to do more with the history of ideas in the scrolls and how they may or may not represent a broad stream of apocalyptic Judaism of the period and so forth. You know, that
right.
kind of thing. But obviously, I try to go as deep as I can. And by the way, I should clarify, I'm not an archaeologist. My degree, as I said, it's not in anthropology.
I'm not an archaeologist. I'm a geologist that works with archaeologists.
So I didn't even touch material evidence for, 20 years. I just read texts. And then I decided I need to leave the library and walk around ancient Jerusalem and at least know the lay of the land. And get a feel.
I'm glad that it was your decision to actually go out. I was in the field doing a geologic study when we found artifacts, and then suddenly archaeology got thrust upon me.
Sure.
and that was that.
But and I always, sometimes people describe me that way, and I always correct them because I think it's important. I'm a historian of ancient Mediterranean religions. That's my tag.
Oh, hey.
So
that's an interesting question.
We got the magical 666 super chat from Vaguely Agnostic.
And apparently he lives near me. Vaguely Agnostic. Oh, I don't know if it's a he or she or they. But I know you have been there, and history is written by the victors. Do you think that Masada was a mass suicide or a slaughter by the Romans?
I do think that whether the romanticized story in Josephus, book 6, I think, of the Wars, whether that has been turned into literature, which it has, like he has a speech of Eleazar that sounds like he's a Platonic philosopher or something about our souls will live forever, we shouldn't fear death, and so forth. I actually have a book on that, another book called A Noble Death, which is about suicide in the ancient world, so-called suicide.
Oh, wait, hold up a second.
Because it didn't exist in the ancient world. Oh, do you have that
I might
book?
have your book.
Yeah. There you go. You didn't even know it.
I didn't even realize it. I don't know if it's here, though.
Anyway.
A Noble Death. I know I've read that.
Yeah. So that's another subject, but let me just go with the Masada for a minute. So, no, I think we have to be really careful with Josephus's account because he wants to present the last stand of the Zealots and how heroic they were and so forth. But on my blog, I hate to keep saying on my blog, I would have, what was your super chat person's name? It went away.
Vaguely Agnostic.
Vaguely Agnostic, yeah. If you'll go to jamestabor.com and just put in the word Masada, there's a really comprehensive article on that in which I discuss the skeletal remains that were found and everything about them. And I do think it likely that some version of that story is correct, that shortly before the ramp was finished and the Romans were able to get in, there was this, there was this massive death. Did it include exactly 930 people? Where are the corpses and so forth? But there's
a video on it.
Yeah, I got a video on it too. So
let's watch it. Just kidding, not right now.
Yeah.
I was going to say.
We'll watch it I would say it was a Roman slaughter. There were some people hiding in this cave that I talk about in the blog article. and you saw that picture that's highlighted with the skeleton. They were slaughtered by the Romans for sure. So it looks like part of the group didn't go along with the pact, so-called suicide pact.
So
They would call
not
it,
everyone wanted the Kool-Aid after they saw what was happening to those that drank the
well,
Kool-Aid.
I'm going to call it the Noble Death Pact, not the Suicide Pact, because
Okay.
they saw it as just like Saul falls on his sword in the Hebrew Bible. You know, we don't say he committed suicide. Jesus said, "No one takes my life, I lay it down." So Jesus committed suicide. We have a chapter on did Jesus commit suicide in the book. I know that's a little provocative, and everybody, what are you talking about?
Oh no,
But if you
there is
think
full
you're the
discussions
Messiah
on
and
that.
you're supposed to die, you know, it's
if you preach about your death and then the death happens, and you
yeah.
say while that is happening that it was your choice to be there and have it happen.
Well, if you're going to speak out against the Roman government and claim that you're going to be the Messiah that brings them all to an end, and then they kill you, that's not that big of a surprise.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
that a noble death is worth it's out of print, but plenty of copies, like used copies, you can get cheaply that are out there. We're going to reprint it. Art Droge and I wrote it together. You should have him sometime. Art translated the Quran. You do Islam stuff sometimes?
I will take the suggestion. Can you spell his? Oh, I'll have to find your book. I don't have his last name.
Best translation of the Quran, in my opinion.
Art Droge, D-R-O-G-E. Yeah.
Yeah, and critical notes on every page, so you don't have to know Arabic. So Art and I, we wrote a noble death together. Since I'm pitching books here, I have to show them. Let's see, a noble death. You know, when you see the cover,
I'm going to recognize it. Yeah, there it is.
You got it.
It's somewhere. I have it. I know I do. It's somewhere.
I do think that there was an agreement by the bulk of the people there not to let the Romans have their way, which would have been pretty much a disaster for the Jews who were left in terms of children going into slavery, women shipped to Rome, for the men being crucified and so forth. So, but that doesn't mean there weren't any that held out, and some were probably slaughtered. Yes, I think so.
Okay. All right, I got questions. It's my turn, Nat.
Okay, Nat.
God, where to even start? When Paul says in 2 Corinthians, he's bragging about how much he's been persecuted. You know, I've been whipped, I received, the lashing of the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
30, 40 minus one. Did the Jews do that? I guess if he's saying that and he's writing that to an audience, was that a practice that the Jews had?
It's in rabbinic sources. The problem we always face is, can you read the Mishnah, the Tosefta, even some of the Midrashim that seem to be earlier? Can you read it back into the first century in terms of jurisprudence and practice in the Holy Land or Syrio-Palestine under Roman occupation? I would say the best evidence for it is Paul's letter.
Yeah.
Where he says,
he wouldn't just be making that up.
It doesn't seem so, because it's just, it's just sort of by the way occasional letter where he's mentioning all these things. Now, if it's just in the book of Acts, then it can take on kind of this literary
Acts,
where you wonder, was he, he never says he's a Roman citizen. You said you have Paul and Jesus in the back. Everybody skips the back, but in the back, I have a very detailed article on how to separate the four sources of Paul. And most people just mix them all up. They go, well, in Acts 23, we have this.
Yeah.
He was riding a horse and got struck, and he was blind. Well, first of all, it doesn't say a horse. That's medieval paintings, and it doesn't, he never says he got struck blind and so forth. So I go through meticulously and show you how you can try to minimize, it's almost like we do at the Gospels in terms of sayings of Jesus, where we try to talk about dissimilarity and incongruence and so forth, just some criteria for judging that, say, Bart Ehrman would use, I would use, Dale Allison, some of the other, Paula Friedrichsen, trying to come up with what might be from Jesus himself. Yeah. And you can do the same with Paul. And the fact that he does mention that, and then we know it in Jewish literature, so it's not just something, I never, ever heard of that. The 39 lashes, the fact that Jesus, of course, Jesus' scourging was by the Romans. That's a different thing. Now, whether when someone talks about their sufferings, they exaggerate, that's another question. But I tend to take the 7 early letters that usually are called the authentic letters. I like to call them the early letters. Mm-hmm. That would, particularly the Corinthian correspondence, which is actually 5 or 6 letters, but the packet. Yeah. And certainly First Thessalonians, Romans, Philemon, little letter, Galatians for sure. Yeah. What am I forgetting? First Thessalonians, Romans, Galatians. I guess that's it. Yeah, that's 7, I think. And then when you go to the others, you do see a huge jump, or almost like an abyss. Like when you go to Ephesians and Colossians, in terms of Christology, you're just in this different world all of a sudden. It's this pre-existent divine being who's incarnate. I'm kind of unique in Pauline studies because I don't think Paul thought Jesus even pre-existed. I think he thought he was just a fully flesh and blood human being. And I know
the
Philippians
2. Yeah, please. You already know where I'm going with this.
Well, of course, yeah. Many of us, this is not my idea, but Dave, I think Charles Talbert has the best article on it. Do you know my other book? Another Tabor book. This is just out. Paul's Ascent to Paradise. Do you know that one?
No.
Okay, I have a chapter in there on the Philippians too. And I quote Talbert. And Talbert argues, but lots of other scholars now agree with this, that it's an Adam Christology, which means, like Adam, he's in the form of God. And like Adam, he has a chance for equality with God.
Because he's also called him the second Adam.
Right. And, also in the garden stories, if you eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you'll become like gods, equality with God, knowing good and evil. So the first Adam grasped for it. Let's blame Eve, but he ate it too. Let's get it.
But Paul said having not grasping for it, rather staying obedient.
So instead of a thing to be grasped, he became the servant. He emptied himself. And now he's the first human being who's highly exalted into this divine status. And as you know from my book, I have a whole chapter, Paul and Jesus. Paul's greatest idea is mass apotheosis. What is the purpose of human life? Is to become one of these glorified children of God, sons of God. Jesus is the firstborn of many brothers, sisters. Really, there's a problem with the language because there's no gender in this new existence. There's not male or female, as Paul makes clear. But he uses the masculine language, many offspring of God. So what is God doing, according to Paul? He's seeding flesh and blood humans that are of the dust. Jesus was of the dust. With this divine essence, it's like a sperm from God. I know people go, what? He who's joined to the Lord is one spirit with him, as it is written, the two become one flesh. Quoting Genesis.
Yeah,
right?
I can see that.
That's in 1 Corinthians 6, I think, why you shouldn't go to a prostitute. It's a strange argument, but go with me.
Okay.
So if you're joined to the Lord, you're one spirit with him, meaning you've been impregnated by the Holy Spirit. And then when you're resurrected, you shed the body of dust and become one of these new Adams. So far, there's only one, Jesus, and that's his view. So I don't think Philippians 2 is talking about a pre-incarnate divine being who gave it up and then went back and got it again. That would be John. John says that. Glorify me with the glory I had with you before the world began. And that becomes the Christian view. But the Ebionite view is that Jesus is a human.
Right.
And I think for Paul, it's important because how would you identify with Jesus? Are you an eternal divine being that knew God eternally with all of his glory, temporarily gave up your divinity for humanity and then just got it back? Is that you? Or are you like he, born of a woman? Born of a woman, people go, Galatians 4, born of a woman. Born of a woman means you're a flesh and blood human being. It's a phrase in Hebrew. Jesus says, among those born of women, there's none greater than John. He means not an angel. If you're born of a woman, you're not an angel. You're not a divine being. You're a flesh and blood human. Now, this is heretical, of course. To Trinitarians, it's really heretical. But for Paul, it's what would make you think you could also have this same process of having the Holy Spirit, being begotten by the Spirit. You're like an embryo beginning to grow. He says our outer life is wasting away, but our inner man is being renewed day by day and so forth.
Yeah.
So the creation in Romans 8, the whole creation is groaning, waiting for the revealing of the children of God, these glorified beings. And then they will be above angels. And remember, he says, you're going to judge angels.
You'll judge angels, yep.
So God is, to put it bluntly, God is reproducing himself. And so you said you had 4 children. I assume they're of the human species, most likely. Like you married.
Most of the day.
But you did marry like a Homo sapien person. And so they're not you, but they're of your, what would you say, genus, species, genus?
We would say species. Genus, I mean, they're of our genus for sure,
species,
but they're a subset of our, like they're a subspecies of, which
they're Homo.
Subspecies. They're Homo. Yeah, they're in the genus.
Okay, they're Homo sapien from, is it 50,000 years ago, Homo sapien, or is it 100,000?
Homo sapien is 45,000.
Okay, so let's go at that. So your children are Homo sapien. They're not you.
No.
So you're Rick the father. You existed before them. And they were little embryos and they were born and now they're Homo sapiens and they are being tested. Are they going to like grasp at the equality, or are they going to empty themselves and become servants and so forth like Jesus did? This is assuming you were raising them in Pauline faith. And then they would become, if Jesus is the firstborn of many, guess what? There'd be a secondborn, a thirdborn, a fourthborn, and finally, I think Paul is a universalist. I think he thinks everybody finally will be. He says,
really?
Well, remember 1 Corinthians 15, he says, Jesus, there's this process that leads to the telos, the end, after he destroys all opposition to God. And the last enemy to be destroyed is death. And then God will be all things to all. So I think it's almost this Gnostic idea that all those little sparks of humanity will be brought back up and everything will be one again.
Wow.
I mean, my only basis is 1 Corinthians 15 for thinking that, but Now, I know people would say, but what about Hitler? Or something.
Yeah,
so,
Hitler wasn't alive then. Hitler wasn't there when Paul wrote that.
I would never make light of Hitler. I've probably got 20 books on explaining Hitler and who was he. And, I grew up in the 40s, well, the 50s really, as far as growing up, but
of course,
he was born a human being, a little baby like everybody else, and had his history and biography, and apparently was very twisted, more than apparently. I mean, I think we'd all agree. But you know how people always go to Hitler to try to make we call it the Hitler card. You go like, oh, everybody's going to finally be saved, Paul. So,
yeah, you sure about that? So,
well, remember, if he thinks you're dust of the dust, you're not immortal anyway. And so maybe certain people will just never be brought back. So he thinks death is sleep. And the next waking second when you die will be the resurrection. And
it is just the wait, but you won't notice.
You won't notice at all. It'll be faster than yours. If you had a few hours sleep last night, it'll be just like that. But whether you'll have dreams, I don't know.
The freaky part about that though was like the thought of like your body, like after.
Well, it's a new body. Your body.
Right. Supposed to be, yeah.
This
like,
gets. As Rick knows, I have a whole chapter in the Paul and Jesus book also about what Paul really thought about the resurrection of Jesus. And what he thinks is resurrection, literally in Greek, just means to stand up. Dead, sleep, up. But the question is, when you stand up, in what kind of a body do you stand up? In other words, if you come forth from the state of being dead, what do you look like? And he says, I couldn't begin to tell you, although I know it's glorious, it's powerful. It's what was the word he uses? Powerful, weak, strong, glory, shame, or lowliness, our lowly body. He mortal, immortal. So he does these contrasts with the current body, and he thinks it's going to be a new body, but he says he can't describe it. And so his view of Jesus being resurrected is that Jesus was brought forth from the state of being dead in a form, a conscious form, that is now this higher being. And he's the first that this has ever happened to. So in the beginning, God created humans in his own image, but they didn't get the eternal life. He's the first one to get the eternal life. All right? The rest of them are dead. They're in the dust. So he says the first Adam was of the dust, and the second Adam is a life-giving spirit. Life-giving spirit. So a spirit being, like an angel, I guess he thinks, but much beyond an angel, because you're going to judge angels. So this is his cosmic view. I've talked a lot about this on interviews, so some people will be tired of hearing it, but I think it means that the accounts in the Gospels, in Luke and John, where you're touching and feeling and eating with him, are later accounts where you're trying to make the resurrection more of a resuscitation of a dead body.
They're going out of their way to show that this is a fleshly resurrection. There's a reason they're doing that.
To show that it really happened, because people like Celsus later said, you probably saw ghosts. Give me a break. People going to see Grandpa all the time. What am I supposed to make a religion out of it? Yeah, maybe Grandpa did appear to you after he died, but come on. Did you eat with him? No, we didn't. But if it's, we went to the fridge and had cheese and crackers, and I watched his. It's like Santa Claus ate the cookie, there's the plate, kids. See those crumbs? Proof. Paul would be appalled at that idea. I think he would say, oh, great. So God caused a corpse to walk around, and that's what the whole purpose of creation was.
We just got a pun from Dr. Tabor. I'm sorry. I'm just really happy.
Oh, you haven't heard that Peter is appealing and Paul is appalling? That's a famous Anglican joke.
I hadn't heard that.
No, I hadn't heard that
I
either.
find Peter rather appealing, but Paul is quite appalling. Yeah.
That is new to me.
So I can't claim to have created that. But anyway, the text I always tell my students, because they're just blown away by this whole idea, that is, well, think about the book of Revelation. Last scene, chapter 20, before the new creation, the sea gave up the dead that are in it. Now, they all know Michael Jackson's video Thriller. Even if they're 20 years old, they still know it. So that still works. So I usually play a little scene of Thriller. And I said, is this what Paul thought? Like, tombs will open and these zombie apocalypse guys will come out kind of going like this. And I can't act it out. I'll have to, do makeup and all. And they all laugh and go, no, it wouldn't be like that. And especially if you drowned in the ocean. And let's just face it, what happens to human bodies that get thrown into the vast ocean, they become basically poop, right? I mean, come on, we know that. So the sea gave up the dead. What, we're going to go find stuff? I don't think so. So clearly it is saying those who died at sea, that was their cause of being in the state of death. So you have to think of, there's the living, breathing dust person. That's us right now, as far as I can tell. We're not immortal. And then there's the dead people. We've all known people that have died. They're in the back to the dust state or back to the water state if they died in the sea. And then there's, for Paul, the resurrection. So what kind of a body do they come forth? He says, it'll be like the body of Jesus. Glorious, immortal, powerful, exalted to the right hand of God, and so forth. This is how he thought of it. So as far as the tomb of Jesus, I think that would be of no interest to Paul whatsoever. Like, why would it? In fact, it's not just me speculating, because he mentions it in 2 Corinthians 5. He says, let me give you an example. He uses Plato, actually. Plato's example. We look to the things we look not to the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are temporal, and the things that are unseen are eternal. And then he says, so if our tent that we live in is dissolved, that's your body, or our clothing, our fleshly clothing. He uses a tent and clothing, and then he goes from the tent to the building, permanent building. That's the permanent dwelling. So the soul is clothed in the body, Plato. It's like clothing. And then he goes, but we don't want to just be naked. That would be Socrates. Like he did not want his body back. He just wants to go
that's
up.
right.
But he says, we don't want that. We want to be further clothed, or literally in Greek, reclothed. Well, how are you going to get reclothed? Well, in this new immortal body that is a life-giving spirit. So let's say that happened to me, and now I'm the life-giving spirit like Jesus, and I'm immortal and powerful and glorious, and angels are knocked out by even being around me. And I go like, that tent I used to wear? I just love that thing so much. I know it's long ago rotted and full of holes. I always like to carry it under my arm as I walk around. To Paul, that would be Jesus caring about, they go, well, if you find the bones of Jesus, then he's not resurrected. What? That would be the tent or the clothing. You're going to get new clothes. So what are you going to, here's a new suit of clothes. It's glorious and wonderful, and they last forever. They never wear out, the eternal. But I like that old robe I wore that was all rotted and perishing. Can I keep that too? I mean, I'm being silly here, but you get the point. So I think Paul would have no, I've worked a lot on this Taupiot tomb, and whether it's Jesus' tomb or not, I think it's possible that it is. But it's not a theological point at all for me that if Jesus' tomb was found and his bones were in it, it would have nothing to do with his resurrection according to Paul. Now, according to the Luke and John, it would have a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
Because
Paul never mentions an empty tomb. He couldn't care less.
Yeah, he says he was buried. And when Paul says you're buried, he means you're gone. What if he said, and he died and was thrown off a ship and was eaten by sharks? People wouldn't go, well, is the shark empty? Like,
if you don't find the bones of the shark.
I think Paul did believe in a tomb. I don't agree with Bart that he was left on the cross to rot or anything. But the tomb was of absolutely no interest to Paul any more than the sea. You know, he's going to go out in a boat and think, I wonder where all these people are at the resurrection. How are we going to get them back? I don't think it interested him at all, because that wasn't his view of resurrection. The word is metamorphosis, transformation, not resurrection. You go from perishable earthly dust to heavenly glorified. This is a Hellenistic idea. It's called apotheosis. Mm-hmm. Remember Romulus, when he goes up?
Yep.
He's flesh and blood. And as he goes up, the flesh starts melting off and he starts glowing more and more. And finally he's up there and somebody, oh, look, there's a new star. That's Romulus up there now. Now, would somebody go, but let's go get that stuff that just melted off and keep it, because that's like really important to us. But for Christian believers, the way it's become today, it is important, because they think, well, how would you prove resurrection unless you have a corpse walking around? Well, maybe like talking to the guy like Paul says he did. Yeah. That could prove it.
Or that's a one-way ticket to the loony bin. Have fun trying. Like, yeah, right. Up to you.
But I think those appearances, well, that's why Mark doesn't have any. And Matthew says, yeah, there was one, but they doubted. Some doubted. Well, that's real convincing.
Yeah.
You got 11 guys on a mountain that says they're on a mountain. So I'm picturing a kind of misty, cloudy mountain. And they meet Jesus finally. Mark doesn't have that. And some of them doubt. They go, maybe it's him. So, and then Luke comes and says, oh no, it's him. We ate fish. We ate fish with him.
And was it Matthew that they didn't even recognize, or the gardener?
No, that's Luke. That's Luke.
Yeah. They didn't even recognize him because he looks so different.
Yeah, some of I get such a kick. You've been on YouTube for a while and I haven't. And the comments.
Oh, man.
Oh, my God. I have to censor some of them because they're anti-Semitic and racist. So those are like, beep, 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 beep. He wasn't a Jew. Beep, 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 beep.
You know, I've never actually hunted our comments section before.
Well, I feel like I gotta look at them, because if they're overly nasty, I delete them. I don't mean like attacking me. Like if they go, Tabor doesn't know a damn thing about what he's talking. That's not nasty. That's just like their view. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm talking about,
stupid shit. Yeah.
You're gonna burn in hell, and I hope it's sooner rather than later. I almost take
I get told that to my face all the time. That's fun.
Well, I'm a public figure that might experience a Rushdie moment if I'm not careful on a stage. So I have to be careful. But anyway. What was I saying about, the comments? So one of them was, and I'm not making fun of this person. It's our fault for not educating people, and it's the preacher's fault. She goes, you said that Mark has no appearances. What are you talking about? Mary Magdalene, it says he appeared to her, and then remember, because Mark has the bogus ending.
Yep. But last 16
what kind of blows me away is she didn't really listen to the lecture, because I explained all that in the lecture, but she got right to that point. And I'm sure you get this all the time. I heard 3 minutes of your 2-hour thing, and you are so wrong on the resurrection body, and you said there's no empty tomb. Da 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 da. It's like what's that movie where what's his name is God, and he's typing real fast.
Oh, Bruce Almighty.
Yeah, he's
Bruce
you're
Almighty.
wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. You go, just look, I've taught for all these years, 4 decades, students, and I know how to approach them and say, just wait, let's look at this. Let's look at this. Don't make any judgment. Just let's get all the stuff out on the table. Don't just, well, Dr. Tabor, are you saying the tomb wasn't empty? No, I'm not commenting on that right now. I'm talking about what Paul's view of resurrection was. We'll do that later.
So you just mentioned the tomb, so I have to ask, do you think it was a tomb, or do you think it was a mass grave?
I think he was, some of these things we just can't know, but there is the possibility that crucified people were buried. There's some evidence in some of our sources that they were buried and put in a mass grave, and then after a year, the family could come and get the bones or something like that. But I guess I'm less of a skeptic on some of the broad parameters of the story. That is that Jews that were crucified, that, this has been debated between Bart and Craig Evans extensively. And, there's all kinds of stuff out there you can read on both sides. But I'm more of the view that he was taken eventually by a burial party, and the family would have been involved and so forth, and expected to be able to do the funeral rites.
Right.
But
even then, that would have been more than 3 days, right? Like it would have.
No, I didn't. No, I would go more with the that the burial was as quick as possible after Passover. Which would have probably been Saturday night. So I'd expect the tomb to be empty if they did come Sunday morning. Of course, it's empty. It's not like, let's let that corpse rot 12 more hours and then we'll go Sunday morning. I mean, at sundown, the Sabbath's over and Passover's over. And the group that's burying Jesus will take the body. And even today in Israel, when someone dies, they try to do it within 2 days at the most, very rarely 3 days. And that's why every world leader has to fly immediately on a plane, because the funeral is going to be like day after tomorrow, and otherwise you're not going to make it. So, because they don't embalm. So.
Right. No. Yeah. That's
right.
So I don't have a problem, and I think Paul might have when he says, "Look, I receive this tradition that he died, and on the third day he was raised, and or that he was buried, and on the third day he was raised, and so forth." That he's passing along what he has probably been told by people before he came along. So I'm okay with the burial. I just don't think it has anything to do with his view of resurrection. You see the point?
Yeah.
I think there were the first burial was a burial of convenience. It was a burial of emergency. I think it was Thursday, but let's say it's Friday. And Passover is that night, and you're going to eat the Seder. If you have any understanding of Jewish practice, even then, you have to put the corpse somewhere. You don't bring it in your house like you normally would do and wash it and get it ready for the next morning's burial, because it's the feast. But as soon as that holiday is over, which would be Saturday at sundown, you go get that body and rebury it. So I think what Mark is saying, Mark has no appearances, is you will see him in Galilee as he said. That's all he says. And they go to Galilee, but he doesn't say that they saw him, but presumably he thinks they did. Yeah. And it would be something like that transfiguration idea, that they're supposed to go to a mountain that he told them or something. So I think somehow in the Galilee, are you familiar with the ending of the Gospel of Peter? Unfortunately, it breaks off. But I think it might be our best account of what happened, where Peter says, we wept and cried for 8 days. This is after the burial. Because Passover lasts 8 days. There's the days of unleavened bread. There's Passover and then 7 days of unleavened bread. So wept and cried for 7, I think it says 8 days. Might say 7, I can't remember. Got it right here, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then Peter says, I'm going fishing. Now, it's a crazy gospel, and it has Jesus come out of the tomb, and he's 50 feet high and all that. So I'm not, but that one part where, why are we weeping and crying for 7 days if we've been hanging out with him, eating fish dinners, touching him, feeling his wounds, like Luke says in John? It sounds to me like that when they went back to the Galilee after the feast, they would return home. They don't have any resurrection faith. And then they get it. So what happened? I would think some visionary experiences of some type. Then they go back to Jerusalem for Pentecost, the next feast, 50 days later. And that's when they have this, Holy Spirit thing, at least according to the book of Acts. So I'm sure you learned about that, Rick, since you were Pentecostal.
Oh, yeah, the upper room and all that good stuff.
All sorts of fun.
So the idea would be that somewhere in the Galilee, there was maybe somebody had a dream or a vision or something that even though he's dead, he has been exalted. And that's certainly, I would think, something more along the lines of what Paul thought, like a light or a voice or something. And of course, that's not going to be impressive to non-believers because they're just going to say, as Natty just said, you're loony. That's what Kelso said.
I mean,
you hallucinated, and I'm supposed to form a cosmic world religion around your craziness? Sorry.
I always go, what's the most logical explanation? And it's not that it actually happened. It's that your mind has facilitated this concept. It is
right. Or, I mean, someone could believe with my students are mostly evangelical Christians. They take courses in Bible, they're electives. And I try to let them down easy. It's not about my beliefs. It's about the text. And I think most of them that go with me on Paul and begin to learn that that's in fact what these texts seem to say. Paul is our only first-hand witness to the resurrection. Think about that. He's our only eyewitness. Luke, we don't even know who wrote it. Mark doesn't have any appearances. Matthew, we don't know who wrote it. John. So Paul says, I've seen the Lord. Okay. First person testimony. What did you see? I can't tell you. He says, I can't tell you.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, glorious. It was beyond expression. Okay. Yeah. You've told us what you saw.
Do you think he was just gatekeeping? Because I feel like he might have just been bragging and gatekeeping. Because he could have been
talking about the ascent to paradise.
Tell us about it. It's like, nah, I saw him.
Book on the subject. So, but my students, let's say, or anybody who listens to me on YouTube or whatever, could say, well, I am convinced you're right. And when Jesus died, instead of staying in the dust and that being the end of the story, he was the firstborn from the dead ever in this new apotheosis way of a glorified spirit being. And I believe he's in heaven sitting at the right hand of God. So you could be a perfectly good Christian without thinking it's the bones and the rotting flesh that your faith would depend upon. So, in other words, I don't think Paul is thinking that he talked to a resuscitated corpse.
Yeah. Like you're saying, Paul was so Hellenized at the time. Like the idea of a fleshly resurrection, that wasn't even really heard, like maybe in the book of Daniel a little bit, but like
not that, necessarily. Like Paul, think of Daniel. Those who sleep in the dust will shine like the stars of heaven. That's astral immortality. That's Daniel 12.
But
if I shine like the stars of heaven, it's not my rotted body full of cancer and disease or crucifixion wounds. Yeah. It's like I've become transformed into this higher state. Yeah. And certainly Plato left his body, or Socrates left his body behind. And remember the famous line, where do you want to be buried? Where do you want to be buried? This is in the Phaedo. And Socrates kind of smiles and says, wherever you like, if you can catch me. Meaning, you're not going to bury me. You know, where do you want to be?
You're going to bury my body.
So it's a final, like, that's not me. So all of a sudden, the body of Jesus is him, even though Paul says he became a life-giving spirit. So what would the body have to do with anything?
Yeah.
It's
resurrection of the body. That was the weird view back then. Now the idea of a spiritual resurrection is like, by the modern Christian standard, is weird because they're so accustomed to, you know, the idea of the flesh. But back then it was completely backwards.
Well, what were you taught? That he appeared physically first and then became the spirit being when he ascended up after 40 days?
He was a completely flesh blood dude. He inherited a new body, a glorified body.
Oh, he had the new body already.
Yeah, he had the new body, but it was like,
but he could eat.
It came from the old body. Like, it wasn't like a resurrected corpse. It was kind of like the old body was like a seed to, you know, borrow from
Then Paul should have been able to describe it. Like, there were 10 fingers and 10 toes, and he had a mouth and he spoke. He said, I can't tell you. So what were you taught from the glorified body passing through doors and eating fish, and he's got his wounds still? So the glorified body has wounds.
Yeah, I don't know. We never really got into the.
How do you go from that to becoming a like almost like a light being or something?
There's so many questions that I didn't even think to ask back then.
Because people face that today at funerals. I'm sure you've attended conservative Christian funerals. I grew up in the churches of Christ, and I've been at many funerals. And the preacher would say, don't grieve for Henry. He's in heaven with Jesus right now. You see this corpse? And they got the open casket right there. You can see part of his face from a distance. You know, that's not him. Then they go bury him. It's not him. And they read, but on that great day, the dead will come forth from the tomb. And you go, wait.
Yeah, wait a minute.
Henry's in heaven. That's not him. But we're burying him, and he's going to come forth. But that's not him. So what they're doing is they're taking the real resurrection idea that I'm telling you was the idea. It's nothing to do with the body. And they're trying to combine it with the body because they want to keep that proof. So apparently when you come out of the dirt, it is a little bit like, maybe not a zombie apocalypse, but like, well, what if you're cremated and your ashes are scattered? Or what if you die in the sea?
Yeah. Things you don't even think to ask.
Did you know the rabbis in the Middle Ages, not making fun of them, and some of them believe it today, that there's a little bone in the neck? How many bones are in the body? Is it 216 or 300 and something?
It's 216,
I think.
I thought it was 246. Oh, fuck. Hold on.
Anyway, add one, because this little immortal bone can't be destroyed. Even if you cremate the person, it still exists. Even if he dies in the ocean.
206.
206. So that it's either 26 plus 1. Let's make it 27. Where this is, it's in your neck. Seriously. Look it up. It's talked about in certain forms of very conservative Judaism. And that's what God can then use to bring you back.
So there's a little piece of DNA for God to...
Like that's the seed, I guess.
Now that we know DNA, it's starting to make sense to me.
No, but
I'm starting to think they're right.
Again, right? He can't just like, oh, there you were, poof, and then bring you back. Because he's God. He's supposed to be all powerful, right? But like, but like it's not like all powerful. If he
I
needs
think
it.
it's a way to affirm personal identity still.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
why cremation's not smiled upon or encouraged, even though it's done now by Jews as well as non-Jews.
I was gonna say
But
it's
but
that's a culture
pious,
thing.
observant Jews would never cremate because that little bone needs to not be burnt up.
What if? Well, so have we ever heard of people removing that little bone from the body and then cremating the body and then holding on to the little bone and having like a little jar of bones for a whole family?
No, I don't think they. I think it's partly mythology and it's partly a way of affirming continuity with the self. It's obviously in the Middle Ages when they're saying this, they're going to believe it very literally.
Oh no, I'm
like, I'd love to have Maimonides here because he really was brilliant, and just ask him. There's actually a term in Hebrew, I can't recall it right now, for that bone. Do you take that as a literal kind of truth or a way of affirming personal identity? Because God knows us all, even if we're gone back to the dust. I'm almost sure he would say, well, for those who take it literally, that's fine. They have the same faith that God will raise the dead. But could I just tell you and you not repeat it? I doubt if it's literal.
That's right. Yeah. Well, Doctor, I am so happy we got to talk to you. I am not a night owl, and I don't know if you are either, but I'd love to talk to you some more. But I am going to have to step out, and I think we're at our 2-hour mark anyway. So
it's 11 o'clock, and I'm going to go have a drink. So I'm sorry you guys love to wander and ramble, but that's okay.
I love it. Yeah, I love just bouncing around. It's so much fun.
Okay.
I have so many more questions, but I'm going to find the book because I guess you're only 2 hours from me, so we're probably gonna have to hang out sometime.
Okay. Yeah. I go to Asheville pretty often, so we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I'm gonna get
when you guys go off, stay on a minute, and I'll give you my email. So
perfect. That will be awesome.
Well, thanks everybody for watching the show. Hope you all enjoyed. I'm sorry we didn't interact a whole lot with you on the chat. We were just fascinated by listening to Dr. Tabor talk.
I was really fascinated.
But thanks, guys. Stick around for more shenanigans next week. Love y'all.
Bye.
And end.
Outro.
So, Natty, you have a night shift job coming up?
And there it is.